So yeah, before we start and jump into our session on AI for education, let's start with a quick question. All right. So how do you feel about AI for education? Is it an opportunity for you or for education, or is it a threat? So to participate in this survey, just simply scan this QR code you can see here, or go to menti.com, enter the code 1269878, and choose your answer. The floor is yours, Dalia.
All right, thank you. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this session. So my name is Dalia Bavous, and what I'll do is I'll give a quick introduction before I let our speakers get deeper into this topic of AI and education. There is a the session is about the link also between AI, education, and the Sustainable Development Goals. We're entering the last decade to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the target for them being 2030. So many call this the decade of action. So as we enter this decade, it's important, an important question to look into is basically how we can accelerate the achievement of the goals for 2030 success. And there are many ways to address and answer this question. I work, for example, in with lots of private sector companies to support their tracking and reporting of their own contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. So in my professional everyday life, one answer to this question is to push the private sector to do more to contribute and showcase its contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. Another way to answer this question is to look into how we can leverage artificial intelligence to accelerate the achievement of the goals. Today in this session, we're looking specifically at this topic, and we're looking at this specifically for the sector of education. The emergence in general and wider use of artificial intelligence is completely shaping an increasing range of sectors, and education is definitely one of them. What I want to do for a few minutes before we let our speakers really deep dive into this topic is to take a step back and first introduce the SDGs and the link between education and artificial intelligence. So what are the SDGs? Very basic question. A set of 17 goals adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. And this is applicable to the developing world and developed countries. How is education linked to the SDGs? Well, first and very obviously, as one of the 17 goals, one of them is only about education. It's SDG 4. They're all numbered. So it aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. This is quite general, as all the goals are. And so as all the goals are, it's also made up of several sub-targets, 10 exactly for this one, that concretely define how we are going to achieve this more global educational goal. So here there's an example out of the 10 targets. There's on this slide that you must see on your, that you should be seeing on your screen. There's an example of 2 of the sub-targets. They're all numbered. So for example, 4.1 is by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. Concretely, what does it mean? How would we ensure and achieve that? The idea is that through publicly funded provision of 12 years of free, inclusive, equitable, quality primary and secondary education, of which at least 9 years are compulsory, leading to relevant learning outcomes. If we go to the next slide, education is a theme that goes way beyond just the sector of education itself. And many argue that education basically relates in one way or another to all of the SDGs, actually. I'm not going to go into all 17 of them. So I put an example of 5 of them here. Very concretely, beyond that conceptual idea that education is linked to most sectors, we have, there's a very concrete link to those 5 SDGs, 3, 5, 8, 12, and 13, through their sub-targets. So let's take the example of SDG 3. SDG 3 is about health and well-being. If you take the sub-target 3.7, what it says is that by 2030, we want to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services, including for family planning, information and education, and the integration of reproductive health, sorry about that, into national strategies and programs. Obviously, this is key to promote good health and well-being on the planet. How do you do this? You have to do this through educational programs. Same thing if you take the example of SDG 8, which is about decent work and sustainable growth. Obviously, how do you achieve decent work and sustainable growth globally? It has to go through education as well. So one of the sub-targets here for this SDG number 8 is reduce the proportion of youth that are not in employment, not in education, and not in training. So this is just like a global overview to position education and the SDGs and how important this goal is. Now that we've covered that part, how do we make the link to artificial intelligence, and what is the role of artificial intelligence in that global objective? So if we go into the next slide, the question here is basically how can artificial intelligence enhance and accelerate education, but also I think it's not only how can it enhance and accelerate education, but it's also how can it help reach a larger portion of the population, because that's also a way to accelerate education for all. So you see a few examples here on this slide. Let's take the first one that says the first top left one that says smart content. Basically here the idea is digitized textbooks and customized interfaces are tools that need artificial intelligence that not only can accelerate learning, but can provide an increased and easier access to learning to more people. So this is one way in which artificial intelligence can promote increased learning and education. Through artificial intelligence also, educators can easily develop tailored and personalized training programs. AI tools will basically, there are some AI tools that will basically adjust programs based on a user's knowledge, interest, and already acquired strength to basically develop a program that is specific to that person, targeting what they need to learn. This is not only accelerating the learning of said users, but it can also appeal to more users and increase changes of in enrollment for populations who, for example, are working at the same time and cannot afford the extra time. If you have this specific targeted program, you gain a lot of time and you have an increased population that will reach that level of education, for example. Another example here, and another way that AI can enhance learning is basically by providing, this is just a series of examples, obviously, to contextualize the whole idea. But here, another example that I find interesting is AI can enhance learning by providing live feedback and inputs to teachers, for example. So if you take a classroom, and you can put sensors and cameras within the classroom, which will analyze basically classroom dynamics and help teachers adjust on the spot by giving them feedback how to ensure maximum engagement of their students. So those are just a few examples amongst many that kind of showcase how AI can really enhance and promote education for all. Like you may have heard in some of the previous sessions, if you've attended, governments are also starting to link education to their AI strategies in order to promote that goal of accelerating learning and increase the reach of educational programs. A few examples that we have here, again, very few examples, many amongst many that we could have, are from the Dutch, Swedish, and Chinese government. What the Dutch government did is that they had a 2019 policy that supports education and skill development in artificial intelligence by funding specific tools, by providing access to specific programs for civil servants, and by massively investing in trainings for all citizens that are related to AI. The Swedish government also included included basically the sector of the educational sector within its artificial intelligence national strategy. So that was concretely seen through the creation of specific bachelor's and master's degrees on AI topics. And then the example of China. In China, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology basically presented a national strategy for artificial intelligence called a Next Generation Artificial Intelligence. And what they did is that so in 2018, that policy was in 2018, they constructed an AI park, invested like 1.8 billion euros into the into like research and commercialization of this park. Basically, it's a park for startups partnering with foreign universities, promoting basically the spread of AI. And the other example you have here is that one of their cities announced a plan for approximately 12.8 billion euros fund for investments in the AI industry and higher education. So basically the idea here is that governments are really pushing for this AI and education combo and really starting to link up those two topics to promote a bigger reach for education. So those are just a few examples amongst many to set the stage for the rest of this breakout session. I'm going to stop here and then open the floor to our first speaker, Julian Vlad Serban, who will address the topic of how can governments provide high quality personalized education for millions of learners at a low cost, anytime, anywhere. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalia. Can you hear me? Is everything
yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks for presenting earlier and setting a very good context for the discussion of the SDGs. So my name is Julian, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Corbit, which is an AI edtech startup. And if you go to the next slide, please. Our mission is to democratize the world's education with technology, specifically AI technology, because we think it has the potential to radically transform the way that education is done. So our mission is, in a nutshell, to provide high quality, personalized education for millions of learners around the world at low cost, anytime, anywhere. And there's sort of two key insights that inspired us and has led us far. The first key insight here is that AI technology has advanced tremendously over the last 5-10 years. We have new artificial intelligence, machine learning models, natural language processing, reinforcement learning, all kinds of techniques that have been developed and fine-tuned and that now work very well. And these can be used to deliver high quality, effective, personalized education. And the thing these tools need is a critical mass of data. We need lots and lots of data points in order to build these kinds of models. But today we have hundreds of millions of students studying online. It was already growing a lot the last 5-10 years with organizations like Coursera, Khan Academy, who now have hundreds of millions of students. And then on top of that, if you add all of the free educational resources, Wikipedia, Scholarpedia, the millions of free textbooks available, well, we have all of the content or all of the fuel that's needed to build this technology. So if you go one slide further. So we've been working the last 3 years on how to use this technology to change education. And we've sort of started from scratch, thinking what is the best learning experience for a student. And so if you go one slide further. And so we started with the premise that education is going digital and online. And I think this is a very strong trend. And even after the coronavirus lockdown, it will continue to persist to some extent. Like universities and schools are all moving to be more and more online or blended already. And so are companies when they do professional training. And so if you go one slide further, and then the second key insight that we build upon is that personalized instruction is extremely effective. So we have studies since the 80s that show that if you take a student out of a classroom and you give them one-on-one instruction like a private tutor, they perform much better than the average student in a regular classroom. In fact, they perform 2 standard deviations better, or they are in the top 2% of the class. And so we know the importance of a personalized instruction for every student that matches their needs. And if you go one step further, and so we take that and we combine it with these advances in AI technology, and out of that is what we call the AI tutor, the artificial intelligence tutor. So if you go one slide further, thank you. And so that's really our solution, like combining these insights to build what we call an AI tutor. And if you go to the next slide, yeah, so here is sort of a schema of how it works. So we focus on student-centered learning, where every student is unique. Every student needs their own curriculum. So the first thing an AI tutor must do is to establish what the student needs to study based on their previous studies, their learning profile, their goals. And so what happens with an AI tutor is that the students select their skills and answer some background questions. Based on that, the AI tutor creates a personalized curriculum that's unique to each student. A sort of Lego blocks that can be put together in millions of different ways. And once the curriculum is in place, then the student studies together with the AI tutor, sort of through one-on-one interactions, watching instructions, solving exercises, doing projects all the time while getting feedback from the tutor. So if you go one slide further, here you can see some of the modalities that we've been working on developing the last couple of years. So we focused on personalized learning and active learning, hands-on learning that forces students to really apply the concepts. So we have a combinations of 4 different techniques that we are building. So one is obviously the typical instructional material like lectures. But instead of just having a video lecture, students also need the ability to ask questions, to reason about what happened in the lecture, and maybe also to help other students inside a lecture. And an AI technology can help assist that, can help answer questions and facilitate this process. The second part is exercises. We know that active learning reinforces the concepts and forces the student to kind of connect different concepts together. So this is where interactive problem solving with the AI tutor comes in. The student gets a problem statement and they try to solve it. And while they're doing that, the AI tutor is analyzing their solution and giving feedback. And sort of the next step after that are what we call lab projects, where a student gets a bigger project to do, and where they have to combine all of the individual pieces of knowledge and skills that they learned into something bigger. And also here, the students work on the project and get feedback from the AI tutor. And if the AI tutor, for example, detects that they're missing some prerequisites, that there's a knowledge gap, for example, it would go back and teach that part that's missing to this specific student. And the final component that you see up in the right corner is the motivation and metacognition skills. So while all of this is happening, the AI tutor is building a student model that describes the student's learning profile, their knowledge gaps, and using that is trying to teach students as effectively as possible by providing hints and pedagogical interventions. And among these things, also motivation to help them if the material is too difficult or too easy, as well as building metacognitive skills like problem-solving skills in general, like suggesting students different types of strategies and analyzing if the student is able to follow those strategies or if they need more hints and nudges along the way. So if you go one slide further. So this is sort of one student working with one AI tutor, but of course, there are many students around the world and they also need to work together. There are lots of skills that an AI tutor alone cannot teach. Teamwork skills, social collaboration, group projects, and so on are like a key element of this. And so we kind of foresee a future where students work together with an AI tutor that facilitates their work in group projects, and that sort of steps in if there is a need for clarifications or new content, or if one student is missing some prerequisites to participate, and then bring them up to speed. And so our solution of the AI tutor is to provide personalized learning paths, personalized feedback to students along the way, provide an accurate skills assessment. We do that through an almost invisible assessment framework, a formative assessment framework, and then include as many hands-on exercises and projects as possible, and of course also gamify the whole learning experience, make it a fun and rewarding experience. And the result of that is that students learn better, more effectively, and that they're more motivated to do their studies. So if you go one step forward, so there's a video here, if you could play that. This will show you what the AI tutor we have today is and kind of make a lot of these ideas concrete. I think, yeah, you can already, yeah, okay, go ahead. Okay, so I will just speak over the video. So today, Corbett is focused on teaching data science using AI tutors. Data science is extremely difficult because it needs mathematics, statistics, programming skills. And these are very hard to learn. And so there's now millions of people around the world learning these skills, but are struggling to actually get there. So the first thing Corby does is builds a personalized curriculum that you see here. So there are over hundreds of paths that students can take. And depending on their background and their goals, they're assigned one of these hundreds of paths. And then they follow that path. They watch video lectures, bite-sized chunks, 5 minutes each, let's say. And then they do exercises. They get these small, like conceptual exercises they have to study. And then based on that, the AI tutor will analyze their answers and give feedback while building up their student model, their student profile and knowledge gaps. So that's what you see here. And here you see an example of the AI tutor providing a hint in terms of a diagram. And so there's millions of ways that the AI tutor can help the student, and it's constantly reevaluating what this student needs at this particular moment in time to learn as effectively as possible. Here is an example of learning math with the AI tutor where the student have to type in math equations. And again, the AI tutor analyzes their equations. In this case, it's correct, but if it was not correct, it would figure out what's missing and try to teach that. Here's an example of teaching coding skills, which of course is also very important in data science. So here the AI tutor analyzes the student's code, as you can see, and gives feedback. So today we have over 10,000 students on the platform, and we have done lots of cohort studies to analyze the impact of the AI tutor, and we've seen that there is a massive improvement both in student learning gains with over 59% improvement in learning gains and in the engagement time, actual study time by students. Students study more than 70% longer with Corbett compared to a regular online course. So if you go back to the slide deck, thank you very much. You go. And so today we have two versions of Corbett, and this is very much in line with our mission to democratize education using AI technology. The first one is the Corbett free platform, which is for students around the world, high school students, university students who are learning data science. It has all of the core content, personalized learning paths, interactive exercises, coding projects, and so on. And then we have the Corbett Enterprise Platform, which is for companies to upskill their employees in data science skills. So this has also the core content, personalized learning paths, coding projects, and so on. But it also has the enterprise content, like real world applications that the company would need, dashboard analytics to track and make sure that employees are following and hitting their skills targets, and customer support. So today we have, as I said, 10,000 students, and we've measured huge improvement in both student study time and learning gains. And we can see the impact that the AI tutor has. And what's happening is the more students the AI tutor sees, the better it gets at giving feedback. The more of one type of knowledge gap or one type of student profile it sees, the better it gets at helping this tutor, this type of student. So what's happening is the system is improving by itself every day. And so if you go to the last slide, so that's all I wanted to say. We are an AI tutor company. We build AI tutors. We have seen a massive improvement in it, and we're now focusing on using AI tutors to train employees and students in data science. So if you have a need for data science training, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Or if you would like to discuss this technology or find other ways of bringing it to more people around the world, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email is julian@corbett.ai. Thank you very much.
Anne-Marie.
Hi, thank you, Julian. It was really interesting. Hi, everyone. My name is Marije, and together with Stephen, we'll talk a little bit about a case demonstration we did for a Dutch college. We're both from the Netherlands, so our case will be from a Dutch college. So what was this case about? It was about student dropout. So a Dutch college asked us, we have a pretty high student dropout. What can that data, what can AI do to help us decrease this amount of student dropout? So we did an analysis of the dropout, found some great results, and we built a dashboard that helped the college show different factors of why the student dropout was happening. You could go to the next slide. Thank you. So in 2015, the European Commission set a strategy aimed at increasing the overall education level. So they said, well, one of the goals is to have at least 40% of 30 to 34 years old complete higher education. So in 2015, it was around 27%. So for 5 years later, they wanted to have it to 40%. So if we look at the latest data of 2019, it was increased from 27% to 30%, but not yet 40%. So why is this? One of the reasons you could say is the dropout rate, which we will talk about a little bit later. But why do we want to have such a high level of people that completed higher education, or also called tertiary education? So that's like the education after high school. Well, why we want this? It is shown, it's shown that people with higher education make healthier life choices, and their physical health is better. Also, their economic well-being is higher, and it showed that participation in political and community affairs is higher for these people. But also, if we have more people that have completed higher education, it is regarded as crucial for creating the high-level skills that Europe's knowledge-intensive economic sectors need, as well as for Europe's capacity to innovate and foster productivity and social justice. So if we go to, yeah, thank you. So if we look at how many people start college and how many people drop out before completing this education, it's around 10%, which is actually pretty high. If you translate it back to numbers, that's over 10 million of people in Europe that do not finish their higher education. So if you look at the Netherlands, this rate is around 5 to 7.5%. So this is a really large percentage of students that still struggle. So what can we do to decrease this number? Next slide, please. So one of the things we could do to help decrease the number of dropout is counseling. If you maybe could prevent people from dropping out by giving them personalized counseling, talk to someone, a tutor, or whatsoever, maybe you can decrease that number so more people finish their higher education. However, it is difficult to identify what students require education because it's not as easy as maybe as thought to see what people are going to drop out. And next slide. So what do we do? So Dutch College asked us, so can you help us with creating a dashboard? So we gathered information from that school and dropout as students by using administrative school data. So this data differed from what kind of program they're doing, from what did they do before, some personal characteristics, etc. We analyzed relations between dropout and students. So in this data set, we had students who dropped out in the last few years, but also data from students who did not drop out. And then we looked at the differences. So what factors could have caused that these people dropped out? Based on these insights, oh, sorry, a little bit too quick. Thank you. So based on these insights, we determined actions. So we have now the results. We know what factors could increase or decrease the dropout rate. So what could we do to create that value? And that was by creating a dashboard that showed that students have a higher chance of dropping out. If you know that, you can talk to these people. You can offer some counseling. You can see if you can prevent it. To the next slide, please. We did this while taking GDPR into account. I'm not sure if everyone is from Europe, but the GDPR is a general data protection regulation. It's regulation in the European Union where personal data of persons is protected. It's actually a law that's really strict in the Netherlands, and there are really high fines if it's not, or if this law is violated. So what did we do? We made sure that the variables that were used did not have discriminating attributes, as well as generic information about the students. So the data we used, we could never trace them back to personal students. We did not know who these people were. We didn't know any names or any other personal information. And only a couple of people were access to this already anonymized data, but not to everyone. So only for the people who needed it to build the model was the data given. And also data encryption was used to make sure that it could not be traced back to students itself.
Thank you, Marije, for this introduction on the topic. So we had access to data sets from the schools, telling us things about, for example, student background, the educational characteristics, and also the school characteristics, like the education program they'll be following, or if they already had educations at that school before. For example, they switched from one program to another. Things we found, for example, within the student background is that students that have a younger age tend to drop out earlier than students that have a bit of a higher age when they join the program, which is, in our belief, primarily driven by motivation. Also, things we found with regards to educational characteristics is that, for example, students that would follow the lower educational tiers or the lower educational programs within the schools would also drop out earlier. These are programs that are more geared towards practical hands-on jobs, like, for example, mechanics or being an electrician. And last, we found that the school characteristics, for example, specific sector trainings, would have higher dropouts than others. So having information about all these types of influential factors would enable us to capture those relationships within a machine learning model. Can you go to the next slide, please? So if you want to use machine learning for like a problem like we sketched today, where you want to predict if a person is going to drop out, yes or no, this is possible. There's types of models that would allow you to do so. However, there's one limitation with regards to using statistics and machine learning models for this particular case, and that's that dropout is quite rare. Luckily, it's only 5% in the Netherlands, but this causes a problem if you would like to model this. And that problem is exactly as follows. If you would build a model that would simply predict that a student is not going to drop out, you would get 95% accuracy, simply because the model will simply say no dropout. You would calculate the accuracies and you would score very high. This is something you don't want, because such models don't have any knowledge and they are not able to capture any of the information that is stored within the data. So in order to resolve or to prevent that such models would come to existence, you would like to rebalance your data set. Can you go to the next slide? So this is a bit of a complicated slide, but I'll walk you through it, starting from the left. Like I mentioned, we had roughly 5% of students that would drop out. So we used a technique which is called synthetic minority oversampling, which implies that the group that would drop out and the information that is associated to those students was expanded. So we would sort of expand the group of students that drops out within the dataset in order to compensate for their small presence in all the data that we would have. Then, by using a so-called random forest model, which is a combination of multiple decision trees, we were able to select variables that would have a large explainable influence or a large amount of power in explaining if a student would drop out, yes or no. The analysis indicates that the variables like the amount of time a student would sign up before the educational program would begin is one of the strongest explainable variables explaining if a student would drop out, yes or no. So for example, if he would sign up a few days before the program would start, most probably this student doesn't know what he would like to do and he randomly signed up for anything that's available, therefore giving him a high probability of dropout. Analyzing the data set we had and using the model as mentioned, we were able to get a prediction accuracy of roughly 91% on a data set that was not exposed to the model. This is lower than what I mentioned earlier, and showing that the model was able to capture the relationships within the data set and actually making the informed decisions about a student. For reference, I've also mentioned the false positive and true negative rates, indicating that the model sometimes is also wrong, simply because machine learning is not like a magic trick that will always be 100% right. We're trying to extract causal relations from data, trying to say something about real life practice. Can you go to the next slide, please? So mostly what happens is that data scientists tend to build machine learning models and then finish their assignment. In our opinion, it's only that an assignment can be finished is when it's actually making an impact within an organization, because that's where change happens. So in order to make this machine learning model more accessible to the business, we've encapsulated into a dashboard, which is shown in the slide on the screen. The model would show two things. First, it would show you if the student would drop out, yes or no, and it would give you an indication with the probability. So how certain are we that the student is going to drop out, yes or no? And this calculation is based on 14 input parameters like age, the education the student followed before he joined the program, the education he's following now, the level difference, etc. We went one step further than just giving an explanation on dropping out, yes or no. We also indicate the primary drivers that resulted into this decision. You can see it below the two green boxes in the screen. There is three colors, red, blue, and gray, indicating variables that in gray cannot be influenced, like for example, age. In blue, variables that have a positive contribution to the decision of not dropping out, and red, a variable that negatively contributes to well, this student dropping out. So this information is, can you go back 1 second? This information is very important because it enables the school counselors to have a proactive conversation with students. So they can go into the conversation by saying, hey, I see that you have a quite high probability of dropping out. And we see that this is because, for example, you signed up very recently to the program. Maybe we can have a conversation about if you really want to do this type of education. So in that sense, really help the student and, well, see if you can come to a solution and prevent him from dropping out. Yes, next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we can only have an impact if we are able to make a change, and this dashboard is one of them, but also it's taking actions. So for example, the analysis we did resulted into insights that are primary drivers for dropouts. For example, travel distance. We see that students that live very close by or very far away have a high tendency of dropping out. So maybe it's possible to work with adapted schedules for students that might have this issue to prevent this. Other things are, for example, level differences. If you have students that have a very well, big or small difference, you can address those differently. Project durations, the short projects tend to drop out earlier, maybe you can address those students differently, etc. So it's not only getting the insights, it's not only building the machine learning model, it's enabling the business to use those insights and to turn those insights into actions, because that's where change really happens. I thank you for your attention.
So today I would like to present to you a project we did for the French Ministry of Education. So actually there is two projects. The first one is to analyze the logs of a web app that we gave to a class of children to analyze how they behave for problem solving and to identify patterns on the way they answer the questions and how they react to the different manners to ask a question. So, for example, we gave them so the first exercise that you can see on the left of my screen. We asked them to find the perimeter of the lake. So it's a very simple exercise, and what they had to answer is a few tools on the app. So they had a ruler to measure the different part of the lake, but you don't need to use it to answer, because there is also a lot of other information you can use to solve the problem. So what we did is we took all the logs generated by this application to have a better understanding on how they react. So for example, we used the time of the time they needed to answer, where they clicked, and so on, to identify different categories of people and different strategies to answer the problem. So we took all the logs, and something very interesting is that we found the same number of clusters than the didactic theory. So there is a lot of theory on how people behave when you give them an exercise, and how do they understand a problem. And we found exactly the same patterns and the same ways of solving a problem. So this is the first very interesting fact about this program. But we also try to understand if the manner of asking the questions could influence the different categories of people. So, for example, we gave them, for some of them, we gave them the lake exercise with a video to ask them how to calculate the perimeter of the lake. For some of them, it was just an audio, and for some of them, it was just a text. And for some people, if you give them exactly the same sentence but with an audio with a text, their understanding of the problem will be very different, and for some of them, they won't be able to answer just because they don't have the good way of understanding the problem. So the goal was to identify these patterns to give the teacher a better understanding and how to address the different person, and how they can improve the understanding for the children. So this is the first project we had. The second one is we wanted to understand the use of digital tools in college. So this is to understand the dropout of for some children, but also to identify inequalities between different social class and so on. So previously, the use of tools was measured by agents coming to schools and asking the director of their use of digital tools. So it was very imprecise, and it was very hard to understand the real use. So what we did is the same approach. So we gathered a lot of logs about the usage of the computers in different schools, and we have categorized the different establishments according to the type of digital tools they use, of whether the teachers had a personal website they used for teaching the children, and so we gathered all of that, and we tried to understand if there were a link between the digital inclusion, so the access to the accessibility to the digital tools, and the social class inequalities. So the answer is yes. So we found different links between the use the different school had of the computer and the accessibility, and the inequalities between the children. So after that, the French government deployed a very large project to try to give digital tools to the deprived place and the deprived school, to help the children in dropout to have access to these digital tools and to have a better tools to study. So that was the second project we had with the French ministry. And after that, there are a lot of different projects they want to address, to go one step further and to give, for example, with the first project, they want to give to each teachers a tool to monitor how they should teach to every children, to give them tools to personalize their lessons. And for the second project, they want also to continue and to give each school a way to monitor their own use of digital tools and how they could improve their lessons by using these tools differently or more appropriately. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Guillaume. That was super interesting. Thanks, everyone. If we don't have any questions, I will use this time to thank all the speakers for taking the time to attend this session, for giving us a really comprehensive and interesting presentation on those topics. In very each of them had a very different perspective and came from a different viewpoint. It was really, I thought it was really interesting, and it kind of gave a very comprehensive overview of how far we can go with AI on education. So thanks a lot for that. If we, I believe we have one last little quiz, Farah, before we log off.
Yes. So yes, let's finish our session with the last question we have for you. So please rate the following AI use cases in terms of their impact to foster the SDGs, especially education. and their feasibility. So again, please scan the QR code and or type the number you can see, and then we can have a look at answers.
All right, it looks like everyone has answered, and that everyone seems to quite agree and be in the upper right quadrant with the impact of AI use case to foster the SDGs and on their feasibility being quite high on both questions.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys for such a great session. Thanks for attending. And I think we can wrap up at this point.